Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another evening of Garden Line or Garden Hour. Sorry, I went back to our original TV show here. My name's John Ball, professor here. You saw my picture up there, still had a mustache in it. I'm the only one here tonight. And don't shut off. We're gonna have a good little show. It won't be as long as normal, and I promise to cover more than just trees. But everyone else in the show had to be somewhere else tonight. It was all planned. And unfortunately, we weren't able to get anyone else to come on here, and not wanting to waste your time, we decided to still go forward with this program here. So I'm going to click on and do my sharing here. And let's see. Oops, I'm going to go back to, there we go. All right, so everyone here tonight, and welcome and thank you for joining us this evening, kind of an abbreviated session of Garden Hour here. And I'll try to watch the chat box too and see what's coming up, but I may be looking at that more towards the end of we'll look at about 20 minutes. But you know what I usually do on mine, and that is I go over the growing degree days and point out that they are increasing. We are in the dog days of summer, everyone. You know, that period from the early July into August where we get those hot, humid days. And we certainly are in those. No matter where you are in the state, it's been warm. We've had a couple of days with low humidity today, and kind of yesterday has been kind of our reprieve from the last week or so. The state goes from incredibly dry, for example, down in the Southwest, where as I'm driving my truck looking at trees there, I'm leaving a cloud of dust more than a mile long, it seems, to the Northeast, where I was last Friday, where some of the landowners had to send me directions to get to their place because some of the roads were underwater. So we're dealing with the two evils for trees, too wet and too dry at the same time. But it's been warm. We're at about 12 to 1400 growing degree days. We're ahead of last year for Sioux Falls. We're at about 1400 by this time last year. And that's so we caught up. It's been hot, and I don't have to remind anyone of that. We are getting some of our summer flowering plants, our late summer flowering plants. The hydrangeas are in bloom, the panicle hydrangeas, as well as the smooth hydrangeas with the big kind of puffy flowers. I love the panicles. They have become a favorite plant for many in the last 5-10 years. A lot of new varieties out there. They are drought tolerant as opposed to their close relative, the smooth hydrangeas, which we refer to as water pigs. Those will literally wilt if you don't have enough water. Where these are pretty tough plants, and if you haven't thought of a hydrangea in your garden, you might consider it, with one exception, and that is the problem with Japanese beetles, which we will be discussing tonight. I might also mention I ran into this really nice plant in Hitchcock Park in Mitchell, and that park must contain everything. But look at this, a shingle oak. And shingle oak is from about Brookings, Highway 14 south. You're not going to be able to try it anywhere else, but Rapid City all the way across on Highway 14, I-90, you'd be able to grow this oak. It's not very well known, but it has a beautiful form, and look at the foliage to it. It's pretty. It has this kind of leaf without any lobing, so it doesn't look like an oak. But the other thing I want you to notice, the leaves are green. And unfortunately, a lot of our oaks right now, the leaves are already turning yellow. I mean, that's the way a swamp white oak's supposed to look. Bright, glossy green top, and then the underside being a nice white. But this is what they're looking at this time of year right now. And this is an iron deficiency. Now, it's not that we don't have enough iron in our soils. We have more than adequate amount of iron in our soils. So adding anything isn't going to help. The problem is our high pH soils, or the alkalinity of our soils, actually ties iron up so it's not available to the plant. And so the problem we have here is if you just test the soil, there's iron. But if you have a high pH, that iron is not available to trees such as oaks that are really, really sensitive to the alkalinity. And so our swamp white oaks are often yellow right now. Red oak, which can be beautiful. This is a red oak in the fall. I mean, bright red, but Spencer Larson down at Oak Ridge Nursery sent me this picture of a red oak he saw this week. Look at that foliage. Now, the fact that we've had a lot of rain lately has actually made the problem worse. And so if you go out there and you look at your trees and they look like this kind of off yellow and a lot of dead, and I'm getting this on maples too. What you're looking at is chlorosis. Now, if it's on an oak, it's iron. If it's on a maple, it's iron and manganese. It may need both. Merely adding iron may not solve the problem, nor frankly, merely adding manganese might solve the problem. You actually have to add both. Reading and file labeling directions. Quite honestly, these are best managed by hiring a professional, a commercial tree company that does treatments for these. And most of our treatments are now injected into the tree because that's where we need to get the microelement, either iron or manganese. But I'll say it's really become a big issue. The other problem we're having is planting. Look at this. This was a recent community tree planting project, and they planted bare root trees. This was last week. Bare root trees, we're done. Do not plant bare root trees at this time of year. You're taking a tree that the buds are already starting to expand. It has not set a root system yet because it is bare root, as the name implies. You put it in the ground, it's going to be warm enough. Those buds are going to pop open, but since the root development is lagging, it takes a good 10 days to 2 weeks to get the roots really established out of the bare root stock. The trees wilt. And so all these trees look like this. Every one of them of the 20, and I'm going to look at some more tomorrow, had all broken bud, leafed out, but since the roots hadn't developed yet, all the trees are wilted, and frankly, they're essentially dead now. And so even though you can go to some stores and that and still see some bare root stock available, bare root in July is dead root. Just skip it. Don't even think of planting it this time of year. And to make the matters worse, they went out there and planted everything too deep to begin with. And that I'm going to see if I can see something here, but okay. And then we have a question here. Oh, suggestions for a shrub to plant around a foundation. Hey, I'll hit that right now while I'm on this slide. If you're looking for shrubs, summer flowering shrubs for a foundation, and so we're only looking at less than 3 feet, any Bemolda spirea is going to work. Gold flame is a beautiful plant for the Bemolda spireas, but the Bemolda spireas are really the workhorse for summer flowering shrubs that really are less than 3 feet. They don't care if the soils are alkaline. They would like you to water them, but that's about it. There's hundreds of varieties out there. So when I say Bemolda, you can go to garden centers and find neon and a number of other cultivars. If you want something smaller, Little Princess spirea. That's a Japanese, and it only gets about 1.5 feet tall. And so it's really, really a beautiful little plant. But spireas sometimes get a bad rap for them. But if you need a tough as nail shrub, you don't know the pH of your soil, you don't even know if you have soil, the Bemolda spireas are really some of the best. So when you go to a garden center, take a look at Bemoldas. You'll probably find one you really like, and it's, check the label, but usually they're 3 feet is their max size, which the hydrangeas, the panicle hydrangeas will like, they're still 6 to 7 foot. So take a look at those, and I think you'll probably like them. Well, let's continue on here and take a look at some of the others. What else is going on? Japanese beetles. Haven't you all noticed that in the last week? And it doesn't matter if you've got vegetables or you've got flowers, the hollyhocks are that. And I got this picture from Wall, South Dakota on milkweed, but look at all those Japanese beetles. And the way you can tell they're Japanese beetles, if you look at the one at the bottom, and it has those tufts of hairs, notice the little striping with those tufts of hair, that is a Japanese beetle. We do have other rose chafers and that are somewhat closely related, but these are the Japanese beetles, and they are piling up on everything. I don't think I've seen as many as I have this year. Here's a picture I took on our hollyhocks. And again, you can see those white tufts along the edge. And if you don't get rid of these, this is what you're going to find in a couple of days. Japanese beetles don't eat. They're kind of like kids. They want someone to cut the crust off their bread. That's what Japanese beetles are. They're kind of whiny. Notice they won't feed on the veins. They feed between the veins. So you get this very lacy network on anything they eat. Hollyhocks, sunflowers. They were devouring sunflowers in our neighborhoods. This is a linden tree. If you look at woody plants, two of their favorites are hydrangeas, which again, I just mentioned that I like, though they seem to like the smooth hydrangeas a little bit more, and lindens. I mean, lindens, they will just hammer like this. And of course, roses. Roses are their favorite. You get a rose garden out there, you're going to find a lot of Japanese beetles. They like the petals, they like the leaves, they just like roses. So what do? You don't do this. Now, this is set up as a trap from the Department of Ag. But let me point out a couple of things. Japanese beetles, when they come into an area, they release a pheromone that draws in more Japanese beetles. And that's what the traps try to duplicate. The problem is Japanese beetles are a little forgetful. As they're going to the trap, they kind of forget why they're going. And they'll drop off at the nearest plant they like. So they're smelling this pheromone that the Japanese beetles are saying, come here. And ideally, they go right to that cup and drop in and die. And a lot of them do, but a lot of them on the way to the trap just kind of suddenly, well, why am I going in this direction? Hey, there's a hollyhock. Let's stop here. And so the standard joke we used to have is take these traps, put them in somebody else's garden. Now, how far away do you want to put these traps? Ideally, you'd like the traps out about what? 400, 500 feet from what you want to protect. That means you're in your neighbor's yard. So you'll find that most extension says do not use traps. They don't fit the purpose you want. So what can you do? Well, a lot of times they're after plants that are in bloom and that. We certainly don't want to kill pollinators. Neem oil, NEEM oil. Now, neem oil is a repellent. It's not going to kill the Japanese beetles. But if you apply it at night, kind of like right about now, what'll happen is you'll end up discouraging the Japanese beetles, is my best way of saying it. So it'll be quite a reduction, and you're going to have to apply it every few days or every week or something like that. But if you want a soft solution, you can do that. Now, if you say, I want to just have them drop right out of the sky, Sevin, SEVIN. But the problem with Sevin is you're going to kill everything else on that plant as well. But if you say, no, I want this a no-fly zone, Sevin gives you a really fast knockdown. You spray that, you'll find dead Japanese beetles. But neem oil, you just find that they're going to leave because it's a repellent for them. Oh, and look at this. I've had this coming in this week. People are noticing after all the strong winds, they look down on their car and they find these little worms, as they call them. And most of those are going to be associated with an ash tree. And see those holes in the leaves in the fruit? That's the ash seed weevil. Literally, it lives inside the seed. And then it starts dropping out right now. Look at this. A crack in the sidewalk. And it was filled with them. And you can see how close of a picture this is to actually get these. But Yeah, we're getting these popping up. Oh, I got a question here. Neighbor's walnut trees flourishing, and they picked up a bunch of green walnuts. How do I grow these? They're green now. I'm not sure how to proceed. Um, what you might want to do is hang on to them for a week, and I'll cover that next week. How's that for a teaser? Because you do need to wait. They do need to ripen a little bit more before you break them open. But next week, I'll make sure I cover how to harvest walnuts. And by the way, use somebody else's driveway because it's going to stain. So make sure you wear gloves. But yeah, they're kind of neat, and we'll make sure we do cover that. And I see someone got the Bamalda sprayed, spelled properly too. So thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, let's see if we can get this working. There we go. What else is going on? Well, we're kind of far from apple harvest, but Sweet 16 is one of my favorite. It's got kind of a caramely flavor, and so it's one of mine. But I do want to point out right now we're getting a lot of apple pests out there. So I wanted to make sure I spent a little time on apple pests as well. Here's a picture I got. Doesn't that look appetizing? You go out and you look at your apples, and they're not that big yet, and they've got this big hole in the side with all this frass sticking out of it. You know that apple's gone. And if you cut that apple open, what you're going to find are codling moths. And there's a codling moth. See it? And what you'll find is these large trails going through the apple, and the whole apple will be mushy. And you might even find a hole at the bottom of the apple because that's usually where they're exit. But if you notice something missing from this apple, seeds. Yeah. Codling moth doesn't eat the flush. It just messes it up as it tunnels through. What it's after are the seeds. And so when I get pictures and people say, well, I've cut open the apple and the apple's all mushy and there's all this black powder in it, and there's no seeds, what you're looking at is codling moth. And right now, the codling moth is kind of burrowed through the apples. You may not find the codling moth anymore. What you may find is just that the fact that you don't have seeds and it's a mushy apple. They drop to the ground and they pupate in debris or actually in the soil litter. And some of them will start emerging again as adults, adult moths. The second generation that's going to lay eggs on the fruit really doesn't cause a lot of problem. It's the first generation that went out there. So I'll back up this. So the first generation that was out there laying eggs many weeks ago on the developing fruit, that's the one that caused all the problems. So when we look at codling moth, our spray window is long since gone. The treatments here started at the right at petal fall, when that fruit was just developing about the size of your pinky. And there we'd apply applications about every 7 to 10 days or so, some up to 14 days, depending on the chemical. But we're trying to kill mom and after the egg hatched, the larvae, because the larvae literally burrows into the apple, usually on the side, punches that hole in it, and then often exits out the base where it's already chowed through the apple seeds. And the other one is apple maggot, and that's out right now. What you'll find is these apples that'll look very dimpled like this, that's due to apple maggot. And that is a very small worm. We call it a railroad worm because it kind of leaves tracks through the apple. You'll still find the seeds. But if you get a dimpled apple like this and you find all these tracks running through it, and even worse, you bite into it and you bite in through half a worm, that's apple maggot. It's a smaller insect. Here's my favorite picture that I took of apple maggot. Look at that. It was coming out of the fruit. Doesn't that make you want to eat it? And the apple maggot will drop down to the ground and pupate as well. The adult is a fly. It almost looks like a housefly. And you're still spraying for apple maggot right now because the apple maggot treatments really start about towards the end of June and continue through July and even into August. Obviously, you've got to watch when your last spray is. There's always a pre-harvest interval. But the apple maggots are still out there right now laying eggs. And what will get them to come out of the soil is rain. And a lot of our places in the state, we have had some abundant rains the last few weeks. And that's really got these out and flying. Now, how do you manage apple maggot? Again, our sprays, a very common chemical is malathion. That's been used for 50 years. I can remember using it back in the early 70s. For home, it works out fairly well, and you can spray it, and you'll be spraying it, like I say, about every 10 days to 10 to 14 days. And what you're trying to do is provide that protective shield, so when mom lands, you kill her, and you can kill the larvae as they're trying to burrow in. You can also use that clay dust, canola dust. And what that is an irritant on mom when she lands to lay eggs. The problem with that is if we get a rain, you've got to apply the dust again. And then the other one is hang a bright red fake apple in the tree. It should be about 3 inches diameter. Spray it candy apple red and then put tanglefoot on it. Mom wants to go for the biggest, brightest red apple. And she'll get stuck on that fake apple and you kill her essentially. You need about 3 apples per tree, 3 of these fake apples per tree. And by the way, you can buy already made apples off the internet where they'll be selling them, but you can make your own too. Just go out and buy a red globe and then spray paint it, just like I say, a bright, glossy candy red, and then smear it with tanglefoot. So it's going to be sticky, and hang about 3 in your tree. Now, by the way, that's the only thing you should hang in your tree. Those jugs that people hang in their tree, these half-gallon jugs where they mix up vinegar and a half a dozen other things. The only thing that does is annoy you when you hit it as you're mowing underneath the tree. You bet it'll collect insects like no tomorrow. But you're not collecting anything that's causing any problems. You're just collecting things that like to go for that. So if you have apple trees out there, you're still spraying right now, but not for codling moth. That's come and gone. If you got the damage there, just pick the fruit, dispose of it. But you should still be treating for apple maggot if you've got that. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'll take a look and see what questions we have here still. Any new treatments for fire blight in apple trees? Locust arborist is using a trunk drench, and then he fertilizes vine injection. That doesn't seem to be working very well. We do have some treatments out there for fire blight, but they should have been applied early on. Next week, I'll talk about some of the injectable products that are out there. There's one available through Rainbow, but it has to be commercially applied. For homeowners, our treatments are 2. One is prune out any infection, even now during the summer. Prune it out at least about a foot beyond infection. You can leave a stub at this time. That's fine. If you remove most of the branch, leaving a stub is actually good. And then make sure you dip any of your pruning tools or even little pruning saws in something like Lysol or Pine Sol for about a minute or 2 between cuts, and that's going to help reduce the problem. West River, we're seeing more of a problem just because hail provides an entryway for the bacteria. So frankly, the best solution, and I know no one wants to hear this, is to buy apple cultivars that are not susceptible, but I realize you already have it. The other is, what about trimming some of the trees with severe hail damage? If they have half the leaves stripped off, wait. Just have patience. Trim off broken branches right now. If you can reach them, hire someone if you can't. But other than that, let them be. Water if it goes dry. But with hail damage, it might put out a second flush of growth. So don't be too quick to go out there and do any more trimming other than prune off any damaged branches to it. Let's see what else we got here. I just bought a Sweet 16 and plan to plant it after the session. Do I still need to be spraying in for what? Your Sweet 16 probably doesn't have apples on it yet. So no, there's nothing to spray. We do have sometimes apple scab and also cedar apple rust, but those infections have pretty much come and gone, and we're not spraying at this point. Just kind of wait. I had a great Sweet 16 up on our little farm here, and that tree, I did have to apply sprays for apple maggots. Apple maggots really liked them. But again, that you're spraying the actual fruit. So you don't spray for that until about the end of June, when that fruit kind of gets quarter size or so. And then you're going to spray about every 10 to 14 days till about pre-harvest or really early September. It's kind of a mid-season apple. Again, it's one of my favorites. So I think you'll like it if you like kind of that caramel flavor. Caramel or cherry, kind of like, what can I say? Kind of think of taking a cherry lifesaver and dipping it in caramels. If you like that, that's the apple. It is pretty cool. But again, you won't have to spray it yet. So I really think we hit all your questions here. Those were good. What about bagging apples? Yes, there's nothing better than bagging them. Those Japanese grow bags are wonderful. You put those around the apple as it's beginning to form. It still allows light to enter. And so the fruit still forms that good color, which is what we need to create that sweetness. But as someone pointed out, that was the only way I got beautiful apples. And you're absolutely right. If someone wants to go through the effort, and apparently you did, to bag the apples, and you can buy the Japanese grow bags for apples. If you put those on, you've got an apple that you didn't spray, but comes out perfect. Again, I really like those. Now, again, for apple scab and for cedar apple rust, you may still be spraying a fungicide because that affects the leaves. And if you lose too many leaves, that's going to reduce the size of the fruit and the quality of the fruit to some degree. But for codling moth and apple maggot, oh yeah. And we have areas that apple maggot is really the dominant problem. Then yeah, use that. It is a great tool. And I might mention too, for the person who wanted to know about walnuts, that with walnuts, they get a walnut maggot. And that can infect the fruit, not the nut, fortunately, but the fruit. So you might want to look at the walnuts you harvested. And next week, I'll do a little slideshow on what to do with walnuts. And even that's going to be a little early. We tend to let them wait a little bit longer before we start cutting them open. We need to have that nut fully developed, and it's not going to be completely ripened yet. Well, we got all the questions answered. I really appreciate you people hanging in here while I'm by my lonesome self. But the folks here said, yeah, let's still do it. So we did, but I promised them no more than 30 minutes. So we're kind of at that point. We will have all the panelists back next week. I promise you. It was just by circumstances that they had different meetings that they were attending this week. And unfortunately, no one else was available either. So this was the John half-hour comedy hour. So thanks for participating in it tonight. We'll see you all next week for a full hour of Garden Hour. And for all your questions on vegetables and flowers and all that, promise you we're going to have the regular hosts back as well as myself. So everybody have a warm week. And we'll see you next week at the same time for another episode of Garden Hour. Thanks again and enjoy your week.